She had always loved the sound of her own voice. It was soft but clear, a voice that could carry through a room and make people listen. She loved speaking, telling stories, singing along to songs, and sometimes just laughing loudly with friends until her cheeks ached. Her voice was part of who she was. It was more than just sound. It was connection, expression, and a way to share herself with the world. Everything changed one morning. She woke up feeling something strange in her throat. It was scratchy at first, almost like a small irritation that would pass. She tried to speak, but her words came out weak and hoarse. She cleared her throat, hoping it was just temporary. But by the end of the day, she could barely speak at all. Every attempt made her throat ache, every whisper was exhausting. Panic started to creep in. This had never happened before. Days turned into weeks, and the problem only got worse. Doctors ran tests, and she learned that her vocal cords had been damaged in a way that might never fully heal. The word permanent hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. She tried to keep hope alive, but inside a fear began to grow. How could she continue life without her voice? How could she communicate? How could she be herself if she could no longer speak? At first she tried to fight it. She whispered, cleared her throat, tried to sing, even read aloud to herself. Nothing worked. Frustration built up inside her like a storm. She became quiet, withdrawn. Friends noticed. They would ask questions, but she could only shake her head or write short notes. The world that had once been full of conversations, laughter, and shared stories now felt distant. Every interaction reminded her of what she had lost. Loneliness settled in. She avoided social gatherings because speaking was too painful and exhausting. Phone calls became impossible. Even ordering food at a restaurant felt like a battle. She watched from the sidelines as life moved on around her. People spoke, laughed, and connected, and she could only observe. Each day felt heavier, like carrying a weight that nobody else could see. There were moments of despair when she wondered if life would ever be the same. She missed the simple things, chatting with a friend about her day, telling a joke and hearing laughter, singing along to a favorite song. It was not just the sound she missed, but the feeling of being heard, of sharing herself with the world. Some nights she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling a mix of sadness, anger, and confusion. She wanted to scream, to tell the universe how unfair it felt, but no sound came. Despite the darkness, a small spark of determination remained. She did not want to disappear completely. She still wanted to express herself, to connect, to be seen. She began searching for other ways to communicate, other ways to share what she felt inside. At first it was small steps, writing notes, doodling in a notebook, experimenting with gestures. It felt awkward and frustrating, but it was something. One afternoon she picked up a set of paints that had been sitting in her closet for years. She had never considered herself an artist, but something about the colors and brushes called to her. She set up a small space in her room and began to experiment. At first it was simple, lines, shapes, colors that felt right. She did not know what she was doing, but each brushstroke felt like a word, each splash of color like a sentence. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of release. Painting became a way to translate the emotions she could no longer speak. Her frustration poured into bold strokes of red and black. Her sadness flowed in soft blues and grays. Little by little, her work began to take shape. The pages and canvases became mirrors of her mind, showing not only her pain but also her hope. She discovered that even without her voice, she could tell stories, share feelings, and be understood. The process was not easy. Some days, she would stare at a blank page for hours, unsure of what to do. She missed the instant feedback of conversation, the immediate connection that words once provided. Sometimes she would cry over her work, frustrated that the images could never fully capture the words she wanted to speak. But other days she felt a quiet triumph. She realized that even if her voice was gone, she could create something meaningful. Her family and friends watched from a distance. They could see the change, the struggle, and the small victories. Some were amazed at how she could express so much without speaking. Others worried that she was closing herself off too much. But slowly they began to understand that this new form of communication was important. It was not just a hobby. It was her way of living again. One evening, she showed her first completed piece to a close friend. It was a painting filled with swirling colors, a mix of bright and dark tones. The friend looked at it in silence, then smiled, tears glistening in their eyes. This is you," they said softly. She could not speak in response, but her heart leapt. For the first time, she felt truly seen without saying a single word. The painting had spoken for her. That moment changed everything. She began to see her voice not as something lost, but as something transformed. She realized that expression was not limited to speaking. Words were one way to connect, but colors, shapes, and images could also tell stories, convey emotions, and touch hearts. She began to embrace the idea that her silence could be powerful in its own way. With renewed determination, she dedicated herself to learning more about art. She read books, watched tutorials, experimented with different styles, and pushed herself to create daily. Each piece became a diary entry, a letter to the world, a testament to her resilience. Even on the days when frustration threatened to take over, she kept painting. Each brushstroke reminded her that she was still capable of connection, still capable of expression, still capable of being herself. People around her began to notice the change. Her family saw the spark return to her eyes, the way she smiled while working on a new piece. Friends were inspired by her perseverance and creativity. Even though she could not speak, her presence became stronger, more impactful. They began to understand that losing her voice did not make her powerless. It made her resourceful, determined, and resilient. The journey was far from over. There were still moments of sadness, frustration, and longing for the life she once had. But she had discovered something unexpected, a way to connect with the world that did not rely on words. Art became her voice, her language, and her freedom. It was a voice that could not be silenced, a language that could reach anyone willing to look and feel. As she sat in her small studio, brushes in hand and colors spread out before her, she realized that this was only the beginning. Losing her voice had been devastating, but it had also opened a door to something she never expected. She had found a new way to speak, a new way to share, and a new way to be heard. And in that realization, she felt a quiet sense of hope. A hope that no matter what life took away, she could always find a way to give back, to create, and to connect. After discovering the power of painting, she slowly began to explore new ways to communicate through her art. At first, it was only in her small room, surrounded by scattered sheets of paper, brushes, and paint. She experimented with colors, textures, and shapes, letting her emotions flow freely. Some days were messy, filled with chaotic splashes that mirrored her frustration and sadness. Other days, her strokes were gentle, soft, and calm, reflecting moments of peace and clarity. Each piece told a story, a silent story, but one that carried her thoughts and feelings beyond words. As she continued, she realized that her art had begun to take on a life of its own. Patterns emerged, certain colors reflected moods she could not describe, and shapes began to repeat like her inner thoughts written in a visual language. She found that when she concentrated on creating, her mind felt lighter, as though the weight of her silence was eased by the flow of paint. It was not just a distraction from her voice, it was therapy, a way to understand herself and her emotions more clearly than she ever had before. One afternoon, while working on a large canvas, she noticed how focused she had become. Time passed unnoticed as she layered color over color, building textures that felt like memories pressed onto the page. She could see her journey, the fear of losing her voice, the sadness of isolation, the small sparks of hope beginning to grow into something more solid. Each brushstroke was a reflection of her persistence, a declaration that she refused to vanish quietly, that she would find a way to be heard. Her family and close friends noticed the change as well. They could see that something inside her had shifted. While she still could not speak, she moved with a quiet confidence, and her expressions, gestures, and the art she shared began to communicate far more than her words ever had. A sibling picked up one of her paintings one day and studied it for several minutes before whispering, "You're telling us everything without saying a word." That simple statement made her heart swell with both relief and pride. For the first time, she truly felt understood. Encouraged by this, she began documenting her work more seriously. She started keeping a notebook alongside her art, writing down the ideas and emotions that inspired each piece. Though she could not speak the words aloud, writing allowed her to organize her thoughts and reflect on what she wanted her art to say. Some notes were brief, just single words or short phrases. Others were longer, almost like letters to herself or to anyone who might one day see her work. These writings became a bridge between the silent expression of the canvas and the inner voice that still needed to be heard. As weeks turned into months, her confidence grew. She started experimenting with different mediums beyond paint: charcoal, pastels, even digital art on a tablet. Each new tool gave her fresh ways to express ideas and emotions she had never imagined she could share. Her room transformed into a creative studio, filled with color, texture, and the energy of constant creation. It became a safe space where her silence felt less like a limitation and more like an invitation to explore the endless possibilities of expression. One day, a close friend suggested something she had never considered before: sharing her work online. At first, she was hesitant. The thought of exposing such personal pieces to the world was intimidating. What if no one understood? What if people judged her work or her silence? But the idea lingered. She realized that even if her art spoke only to one other person, it could make a difference. That small thought became her motivation to take the first step. She started by posting a few images on a private account, sharing the colors and shapes she had poured her emotions into. She wrote short captions, simple descriptions of what each piece represented, and pressed post with a mix of hope and fear. She waited, unsure of what would happen. The response was immediate. Messages arrived from strangers who felt moved by her work, people who said the paintings reflected their own feelings of loss, struggle, and hope. Others shared their personal stories, connecting with the emotions she had expressed without words. She was amazed. Her art had become a voice not just for herself but for others as well. The encouragement from strangers was transformative. She realized that her silence did not mean invisibility. Her creativity, her willingness to share her inner world visually, had the power to connect people across distances, cultures, and experiences. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of purpose beyond just coping with her loss. She was communicating, teaching, and inspiring without ever needing to speak. The idea that her art could resonate with others filled her with a deep and unexpected joy. Encouraged by this realization, she began to push herself further. She challenged herself to create pieces that were more complex and emotionally honest. Some paintings were abstract, full of chaotic colors representing confusion and fear. Others were soft, delicate, and meditative, capturing moments of quiet hope and resilience. With each new creation, she felt more empowered, more capable, and more alive. The process itself became a rhythm, a daily ritual that helped her maintain balance and mental clarity in a world that could otherwise feel isolating and frustrating. She also started exploring storytelling through art. She created series of pieces that were linked by themes, journeys, personal growth, emotional struggles. Each series told a silent narrative that unfolded across multiple paintings, giving viewers a sense of progression and transformation. She discovered that even without a single spoken word, she could create a story that was felt, understood, and remembered. The realization that she could communicate complex ideas visually filled her with both pride and excitement. As her work grew, so did her courage to share more publicly. She began participating in small local exhibitions, allowing her paintings to be displayed in community centers and galleries. At first, standing among her own work was intimidating. People would come, observe, and comment, and she could only respond with gestures, smiles, or written notes. Yet the experience was liberating. She witnessed people connecting deeply with her creations, discussing what they felt, what they interpreted, and even how they saw their own lives reflected in her art. This silent exchange became a powerful reminder that connection does not always require spoken words. Through these exhibitions, she also met other artists and creatives who inspired her. Some had faced personal struggles, disabilities, or limitations of their own. Yet they had found ways to express themselves and share their perspectives with the world. These interactions were encouraging. She realized that creativity was universal, and limitations could often be transformed into opportunities for innovation and expression. Every conversation, even if written or gestured, reminded her that art could be a language that transcends boundaries. Despite the progress, she still faced challenges. There were days when frustration and sadness returned, when the loss of her voice felt unbearably heavy. She would sometimes stare at a blank canvas, overwhelmed by self-doubt, questioning whether her work was meaningful or whether anyone would truly understand it. But each time she returned to the brush, to the paper, to the colors. She reminded herself that creating was not about perfection. It was about expression, connection, and resilience. Each small effort mattered, even if the world did not immediately recognize it. Over time, her art began to evolve in unexpected ways. She started exploring symbolism, using recurring elements to convey deeper meanings. shapes, lines, and color choices that reflected her inner experiences. She learned to balance chaos and calm, movement and stillness, darkness and light. Her work became not only a reflection of her emotions, but also a tool for guiding others through theirs. People began sharing her posts, showing her paintings to friends and family, discussing what they felt. The silent messages she created were now traveling far beyond the walls of her room. One evening, while working on a new painting, she paused and looked around her studio. The space that had once felt small and confining now felt full of possibility. The walls were covered with works in progress, finished pieces stacked neatly, and every corner reflected her journey of adaptation, resilience, and growth. She realized that losing her voice had forced her to explore a world she might never have entered otherwise. Through art, she had discovered not only a new way to communicate, but also a new way to understand herself and her place in the world. By the end of the year, her collection had grown substantially. She had created dozens of paintings, sketches, and digital works, each one a testament to her perseverance and creativity. She had also built a small but growing online community. People who connected with her art, shared their own experiences, and encouraged her to keep going. Through these interactions, she learned that her story, though silent, was powerful, relatable, and inspiring. She no longer saw her silence as a limitation, but as a catalyst for a new kind of expression. Through this journey, she began to redefine what it meant to have a voice. Speaking was no longer the only way to be heard. She discovered that expression could take many forms, and sometimes, the most profound messages came from those willing to listen with their hearts rather than their ears. Each brushstroke, each color choice, each shared image became part of a dialogue that transcended words and touched lives in ways she had never imagined. By learning to communicate through art, she had not only found a personal escape, but also a way to inspire others. People who had felt isolated, frustrated, or misunderstood began to reach out, sharing how her work had helped them process their own challenges. The thought that she could make a difference without ever speaking brought her a sense of fulfillment she had not thought possible. She understood now that her journey was not just about coping with loss. It was about creating meaning, connection, and hope in ways that went far beyond her initial expectations. And so, she continued. Every day brought new challenges, new emotions, and new opportunities for creativity. She painted, experimented, shared, and learned. Step by step, stroke by stroke, she built a silent yet powerful voice that reflected the depth of her experiences. She had discovered a new language, one that could reach hearts in ways words sometimes could not. Her silence, once a source of fear and despair, had become a path to expression, understanding, and connection, a voice in its own right, ready to speak to the world. As her art began to gain attention online, she noticed something remarkable happening. Messages started arriving from people she had never met, people who were moved by her paintings and sketches. Some shared their own stories of struggle, loss, and isolation, thanking her for creating images that seemed to express what they could not put into words. Others simply commented on the colors, the shapes, the emotion they felt while looking at her work. She could not reply with her voice, but she wrote messages back carefully, trying to convey the gratitude and joy she felt. At first, it was just a few messages a day, but soon it multiplied. Her posts were shared, liked, and commented on by hundreds, then thousands of people. Strangers from across the country and even from other continents began to follow her journey. Each new interaction brought a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had never imagined that something so personal, born from a moment of fear and loss, could resonate so widely. Her silence, which once felt like a barrier, had transformed into a bridge connecting her to countless lives. The more she shared, the more confident she became. She began posting not only finished paintings but also works in progress, sketches, and even videos, showing the process behind her creations. People were fascinated by the way she expressed emotion through color, form, and texture. They asked questions, gave feedback, and even suggested ideas for new pieces. She had never sought attention or fame. Her goal had always been simply to communicate, to express what she could no longer say with words. Yet, as her work reached new audiences, she realized that her silence had become a voice with far-reaching power. Local galleries began inviting her to display her pieces. At first, it was small exhibitions in community spaces. She would arrive quietly, setting up her paintings and sketches, sometimes unsure of how people would react. but the response was always overwhelmingly positive. Visitors would walk slowly among her work, pausing to study the layers of color and emotion. Some would sit quietly in front of a painting for several minutes, their expressions reflecting thought, empathy, and connection. Watching this, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her work was no longer just personal, it was becoming a bridge between hearts. She began to notice a pattern. People were drawn not only to the colors or techniques, but to the honesty in her art. The raw emotion, the vulnerability, the journey from despair to hope. These elements spoke directly to those who were struggling, searching or longing for connection. It amazed her that her pain could be transformed into something that healed, encouraged, and inspired others. Each message, each comment, each shared story reinforced the idea that art could be more than visual beauty. It could be a language of empathy. As her reputation grew, national art organizations began to take notice. Invitations arrived for larger exhibitions, interviews in magazines, and features on creative platforms. She was nervous about stepping into these larger arenas. Public attention had always been intimidating, and the thought of her story reaching millions at once was overwhelming. But she also recognized that these opportunities could amplify the message she had discovered through her journey, that even silence could be powerful, and that adversity could become a source of creativity and inspiration. In preparation for a major exhibition, she poured hours into creating new pieces. This series reflected her personal journey, the fear of losing her voice, the loneliness that followed, the discovery of art, and the growing realization of her ability to communicate in a new way. Every brushstroke was intentional, every color chosen to evoke emotion, every texture layered to convey depth. When she finally displayed the series, the response was immediate and profound. Visitors were visibly moved, some with tears in their eyes, others quietly contemplating each painting. She realized that her story, though silent, was being felt deeply by countless people. During this period, she also began collaborating with schools and community programs. She taught workshops where participants, many of whom had their own challenges, explored creativity as a form of expression. She encouraged them to use art to express feelings they found difficult to share with words. Watching these students gain confidence, open up, and find their own voices through painting and drawing was deeply rewarding. She saw reflections of her own early struggles in their hesitancy and moments of doubt, and she knew that the encouragement she offered could make a difference in ways she had once only dreamed of. The collaborations extended beyond classrooms. Organizations that worked with individuals facing emotional, physical, or social challenges invited her to create programs and events that emphasized expression through art. She learned to adapt, finding ways to communicate instructions, guidance, and encouragement without relying on spoken words. She discovered that body language, written notes, and live demonstrations could be just as effective. The experience reinforced her belief that communication is about connection, not just words. Even as her recognition grew, she remained humble and focused on the essence of her journey. Fame and praise were never her goals. They were byproducts of her dedication to expressing herself and helping others find their own voices. Each new opportunity reinforced a simple truth. Her art could reach beyond personal boundaries, inspire courage, and foster understanding. People began reaching out not only to admire her work but to learn from her experience, how to cope with challenges, how to find new ways to express themselves, and how to transform obstacles into opportunities. One of the most impactful experiences came when she was invited to speak, through her art, at a large creative conference. The audience was vast, filled with artists, students, educators, and people interested in personal growth and creativity. She could not speak, but she brought her paintings, sketches, and a live demonstration of her process. As she created a piece in front of the audience, she felt a quiet connection forming. People watched intently, reacting to the colors, the movements of her brush, and the emotions conveyed in each stroke. When the presentation ended, the applause was long and heartfelt. She realized that her work had communicated more than words ever could. The recognition also helped her gain confidence in sharing her personal story more openly. Through social media, online talks, and exhibitions, she began to document not just her art but the journey behind it, the fear, the loss, the frustration, and the resilience. She wanted people to understand that her path had not been easy, that the road to finding a new voice was filled with moments of doubt and struggle. Sharing her experiences made her story relatable, human, and inspiring. People began to comment not only on her art but on her courage, perseverance, and determination to keep creating despite immense challenges. As she continued to share her story and work, she realized that she was helping redefine what it meant to be an artist, a creator, and even a communicator. The traditional idea that voice or speech was necessary for influence had been challenged by her journey. She had shown that expression could be visual, emotional, and profoundly connecting. She had inspired people who had felt limited by their circumstances, reminding them that creativity and resilience could be powerful tools for connection and impact. With recognition came the challenge of managing expectations and pressure. She faced deadlines for exhibitions, requests for interviews, and invitations for collaborative projects. At times it felt overwhelming and the weight of responsibility pressed on her. But she learned to balance her own needs with the demands of her growing audience. She dedicated time to creating purely for herself, as a personal release and exploration, while also finding ways to share her work meaningfully with others. This balance was essential to maintaining authenticity and passion in her art. One particularly memorable moment occurred when a large museum invited her to display a retrospective of her work. It was an opportunity to showcase not only her recent pieces but also her early experiments. The first sketches, the messy canvases that reflected her initial struggle, and the evolution of her style over time. Seeing her work displayed in a formal public space was surreal. Visitors walked through the exhibit slowly, often pausing for long periods in front of pieces that carried deep emotional resonance. The exhibit was not just an artistic display, it became a testament to the power of resilience, the human capacity to adapt, and the ability to communicate in ways that transcend words. During this time, she also reflected on the personal growth that had come from her journey. She had moved from fear and despair to confidence and purpose. She had transformed her silence into a unique form of expression that connected millions. Yet she remained grounded, aware that her success was not just about talent or recognition, but about persistence, courage, and the willingness to embrace vulnerability. Losing her voice had initially felt like a devastating limitation, but it had ultimately opened doors to creativity, connection, and influence that she might never have discovered otherwise. She also began to see the ripple effect of her work. People who had been inspired by her art went on to share their own creativity, create workshops, or start initiatives that encouraged self-expression. Her influence extended beyond her immediate audience. She had created a community of individuals who valued empathy, resilience, and creative exploration. Through her art, she had shown that adversity could be transformed into empowerment, that silence could become communication, and that personal struggle could inspire others to find their own strengths. The most profound realization came when she noticed the diversity of her audience. People from different cultures, ages, and backgrounds were connecting with her work, interpreting it in ways that were meaningful to them. She understood that art had a universal language, capable of transcending differences and fostering understanding. Through her creations, she had built connections that went far beyond the limitations of spoken words. Her silence had become a global dialogue, reaching hearts in ways she had never anticipated. Even as her recognition continued to grow, she maintained her focus on the heart of her journey. She continued to create art daily, exploring new techniques, experimenting with materials, and pushing the boundaries of her own creativity. Each piece became not only a work of expression, but also a reflection of her evolving understanding of life, resilience, and the power of connection. Her studio remained a sanctuary, a place where she could explore, reflect, and communicate in ways that were deeply personal, yet profoundly universal. Through exhibitions, collaborations, and workshops, she learned that impact is not always measured in numbers or fame. It is measured in the moments of connection, the stories shared, and the courage inspired. She realized that her journey, from losing her voice to finding a new one through art, was not only about her own growth but also about the growth of those who experienced her work. Her silence had become a tool for empowerment, both for herself and for countless others. By the end of this stage in her journey, she had fully embraced the idea that expression comes in many forms. Words are only one way to communicate. Emotion, creativity, and vulnerability can speak even more powerfully. She had transformed her personal loss into a story of hope, resilience, and influence. Her art had become her voice, her message, and her connection to the world. Through every brushstroke, every color choice, and every shared piece, she had learned that even in silence one can be heard by millions. Her story was no longer just about losing her voice. It was about discovering a new kind of voice, one that could reach far beyond the limits of speech, one that could inspire, heal, and connect. She had proven that the human spirit, when faced with adversity, has an extraordinary capacity to adapt, create, and influence. She had found power, purpose, and connection in ways she had never imagined. And through her journey, she had become a living example of resilience, creativity, and the transformative power of art. She had come a long way since the first day she woke up and realized she could no longer speak. Back then, silence had felt like a prison, a weight that pressed on her chest and left her unsure of how to exist in a world built on words. But over time, that silence had transformed into something extraordinary. Through her art, she had found a voice far more profound than words alone could provide. She had connected with people around the world, inspired others to explore their own creativity, and shown that even the deepest loss could lead to unexpected strength. Despite the recognition and admiration, she remained humble. She understood that her journey was not just about success or visibility. It was about the lives she had touched, the hope she had sparked, and the moments of understanding she had created. Every message, every comment, every shared story from someone who felt seen or understood reminded her that her art carried meaning far beyond the canvas. It reminded her that the power of expression is not limited to speech, and that silence can sometimes speak louder than words. In her studio, she reflected on the path she had traveled. She looked at the walls lined with paintings, sketches, and mixed media pieces. Each one represented a chapter of her life, a moment of struggle, a breakthrough, or a quiet victory. Some were dark and chaotic, capturing fear and frustration. Others were bright and harmonious, reflecting moments of peace, hope, and triumph. As she surveyed her work, she realized that she had not only found a way to communicate, but also a way to understand herself more deeply than she ever had before. She had also grown to understand the value of patience and persistence. Her voice had not returned, and it might never return, but she no longer felt the same sense of loss. She had discovered that expression is limitless, that creativity knows no bounds, and that influence does not rely solely on spoken words. Through the struggle she had faced, she had learned resilience, the importance of empathy, and the power of connecting with others in authentic and meaningful ways. Her art had become a reflection of all these lessons, and she knew that she would continue to explore and share them for the rest of her life. Her impact extended far beyond the walls of galleries or social media platforms. Schools and community centers continued to invite her to lead workshops, guiding students to find their own creative voices. She taught them to explore emotions, express feelings, and communicate ideas through colors, shapes, and textures. She saw their confidence grow, their hesitation fade, and their creativity flourish. Watching these transformations reminded her of her own journey and reinforced the idea that expression is not about perfection or skill, but about honesty and courage. Through these workshops, she witnessed the quiet power of art to heal. Children who had struggled to share their feelings, adults who had faced challenges in expressing themselves, and even other artists who felt blocked in their work, all found inspiration in her example. She realized that her voice, though silent, had become a catalyst for growth and courage in others. She had become proof that adversity, when met with creativity and determination, can be transformed into a source of empowerment. As her story spread, she began receiving invitations to collaborate on larger projects. Museums, nonprofits, and global initiatives reached out, asking her to contribute her perspective, her art, and her unique approach to communication. She approached each opportunity thoughtfully, always considering how she could remain authentic while reaching broader audiences. She discovered that collaboration could be a two-way street. She offered her skills and vision, and in return she learned from the experiences and perspectives of others. Through these partnerships, her message of resilience, hope, and creativity reached even further. Even with these achievements, she never lost sight of the personal meaning behind her art. Each piece she created remained deeply connected to her own emotions and experiences. Some days painting was cathartic, helping her release sadness or frustration. Other days it was joyful, a celebration of small victories, connections, or moments of insight. Every brushstroke, every choice of color, every layer of texture carried intention. Through this practice, she discovered that art was not just a tool for communication, it was a mirror of the soul, reflecting both the challenges and the beauty of human experience. Her silence had taught her patience, empathy, and observation. She listened differently, noticing subtle expressions, body language, and emotion in ways she never had before. She observed how people reacted to her work, how their eyes lingered on details, how their hands trembled with emotion or their expressions softened. Through these observations, she learned more about humanity than she could have imagined. She realized that communication is not just about speaking, it is about connecting, understanding, and creating shared meaning. Her art had become a bridge to that understanding. With this growing awareness, she began mentoring others who faced similar challenges. People who had experienced loss, disability, or other forms of limitation came to her seeking guidance. She showed them how to harness creativity as a form of expression and empowerment. She encouraged them to explore mediums they had never considered, to embrace vulnerability, and to take risks in sharing their work with the world. The joy she felt in helping others find their voices was profound. She had discovered that her own journey was not just personal, it had become a source of inspiration and support for countless others. Her influence also began to shift how she viewed her own limitations. She had once believed that losing her voice was a tragedy, an obstacle that would define her life. But over time, she realized that it had been a catalyst for growth. It had forced her to explore new forms of expression, connect with others in creative ways, and discover resilience she never knew she possessed. What had initially felt like a loss had become a gift, a pathway to transformation, and a reminder that adversity can lead to unexpected opportunities. Through exhibitions, workshops, and collaborations, she continued to refine her craft. She explored new techniques, experimented with unconventional materials, and pushed herself to convey increasingly complex emotions and ideas. Each piece became a dialogue, a conversation with those who viewed it. She realized that communication is not about the number of words spoken, but about the depth of feeling conveyed and the connections formed. Her work demonstrated that even silence can carry profound meaning when it is infused with intention, authenticity, and creativity. As she looked back on her journey, she understood that the most meaningful success was not measured in followers, exhibitions, or recognition. It was measured in moments of connection, when someone felt seen through her art, when a student gained confidence in expressing themselves, when a stranger reached out to say that her work had inspired hope or courage. These moments were reminders that her voice, though silent, had impact, purpose, and power. She had discovered a new way to be heard, one that transcended words and reached hearts. Over time, she began to receive invitations to speak, or rather to share her story, on larger platforms. She could not speak in the traditional sense, but she brought her art, her process, and her experience. Audiences watched as she demonstrated her techniques, shared the emotions behind her work, and revealed the journey from silence to expression. The reaction was always profound. People were moved, inspired, and often left with a renewed sense of courage to face their own challenges. She realized that her story, though silent, could resonate with millions, and that her influence could extend far beyond what she had ever imagined.